Next, we have Anthony Camarano, VP and Principal Security Architect from Protegrity. Anthony will be discussing achieving cross-border data privacy compliance with enterprise with a secure data solution. Anthony has a 25-year career with financials, data security and privacy, cybersecurity, innovation, and technology, functions managing enterprise scale technology, area management, strategy and planning, and operations support. His previous work includes standing up and running a secure data tokenization service and practice for a large enterprise financial institution moving sensitive data across borders and trust boundaries. Please welcome Anthony to the stage.
Hello, everybody. This is Anthony Camarano, and we are here to talk about achieving cross-border data privacy compliance in the enterprise with a secure data service. Just a little bit of background on myself. Have 25 plus years in technology, 10 of which is on the cyber side. And in one of my previous roles, I actually stood up and managed a secure data service and in the cross-border context as well. A lot of what I cover today, hopefully, will help better understand the value of a secure data service and how that can be applied on the cross-border. Most of what I talk about is a result of my own experience, and so some of this is in the context of financial services, and some of this may be in the context of tokenization. But let's get in. Okay, so our agenda. So I'll talk a little bit about the complexity and maybe the challenges that I face, as well as many other enterprises face in the context for secure data, movement of data across trust boundaries, and that complexity, software stack complexity. Then I'll describe the three principles that I found successful for a secure data service, especially in the context of cross-border. We'll apply those principles onto a high-level design and architecture so we can kind of see, get a feel for what it is. And then I'll touch on some additional benefits that go beyond just cross-border. So when you kind of start to think about things in this way. And my goal today is to help you understand how you can meet your cross-border, but also do so much more using a secure data service. Also, just a side note here, if there is anything that you want to talk about outside of this, I welcome the conversation. Please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or my email, anthony.camarano@protegrity.com. And on LinkedIn, it's at antcam56. And I'll put that up at the end as well. But do please feel free to extend the conversation. Okay, so why a secure data service? What is happening? What is the enterprise facing? Why is cross-border so relevant in this conversation? Really, sensitive data exists everywhere in an enterprise setting. It doesn't just exist in one particular silo or in one particular geo or in one particular location, and it's growing. Okay, so the value of where this data is sourced is generally achieved from some form of data sharing, some form of data movement, and that sharing and movement will cross in the data lifecycle many different privacy boundaries, many different legal boundaries, different regulatory requirements. Could be trust boundaries. And I will say that's how I define border in the context of the conversation. So cross border, it could be data sovereignty. It could be a trust boundary from prem to cloud. It could be out to a SaaS or a third party, something like that. Um, and so, in the context of an enterprise, if there is no reference architecture, there's no standard, there's no service capability to meet or achieve many of these different data flows and movements. Um, Ultimately, what's usually the case is it's left on the app team to start to try to solve and figure this out with some help from maybe a security organization. But then you get into kind of implementation issues around security. Um, you get into solutions that maybe could have been leveraged across the enterprise, but are more siloed, maybe using legacy technologies or technologies, especially from a security standpoint, that aren't advantageous. And so, really, without having or thinking about something along these lines, the end result does kind of increase your cost, increase your risk, slow down innovation on the business, limit your compliance. And so that's one of the things we will be focusing on today. And if we look, at traditionally, kind of how has this been handled? We look at some of the technologies that we probably have in place today. So transparent solutions, transparent native solutions into different databases and data stores. The issue with this in terms of the context that we're going to look at it today is that the data is moving. And when you move out of a transparent protection system, and I'll say protection because it could be transparent encryption, but again, in the context of how I use this, a lot of it is tokenization as well. But in the context of transparent, when you move it out of the system, you lose that protection. And so, if you're trying to cross a trust boundary, a geopolitical border, a privacy regulation boundary, um, you have to have that protection method follow the data. And so that's a challenge for transparent solutions. And then again, if you've got a very complex distributed set of data environment, so all different flavors of every database you can imagine, whether it's Oracles and the SQLs and the Mongos and the Postgres and the warehouses and whatever it is, supporting endpoints in all of these areas and locations is extremely difficult. It is extremely hard to scale. It's not sustainable. I think a lot of like DAM lessons, database audit monitoring, stem from some of that as well. And just in general, I mean, software stacks are coming up on a daily basis, and who knows what's going to be the next software stack. So how do you design for the impossible? How do you design for the unknown? Um, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Um, Data collected needs to move. So I'm going to talk about three principles that I view and that I've experienced as um, successful for a secure data service. And this will go beyond cross-border, but we'll apply it back to the cross-border as well. So I think the first principle that we have to agree on and understand is you need a frictionless onboard mechanism. And so if we go back to some of the traditional stuff in terms of like endpoint agent installs on a thousands of different flavors of all different kinds of database, that's not a frictionless onboarding experience. And so we really need a way to create an on-ramp and create an automated frictionless onboard experience. Got to be simple. Generally, we'll leverage like what you already have in the enterprise, so request management systems, workflow systems to do kind of approval stuff. Um, and we'll collect the data points that we need in those systems in order to provision the environment that we need to create this automated onboard experience. And so I have this mantra: manual intervention only by design. And I say that because there are some in the data security aspect and information security aspect. There's a generally maybe a piece of friction that you inject on the onboarding, which is to say, understand the use case, make sure you or will meet the requirements of that use case. But once you've got agreement in that respect, you want a very quick, very frictionless onboard, right? You want to be in dev tomorrow. And that's what we aim to achieve here. A central, so principle two, a central management plane. Okay. And so this talks to your policy, so data security policy, how you develop, leverage, maintain, deploy policy from a central perspective, your insight, how you gain intelligence over what's happening in the environment. um, and here, we will leverage things like your enterprise IAM and consume some of the governance that's already in place in there, but connect it to policy in a central automated way. Connect to your SEM systems and logging systems to light up and highlight data risk and views that you may not otherwise have had. Um, as well as create and distribute that central policy in an automated fashion. So that's our secure management, and the federated protection we'll get to later on. That's the consumption of a central policy, right? So being able to, where you need protect and unprotect, being able to consume that centralized policy. And then the consumption side. So, principle three is this idea of dynamic consumption or self-describable consumption. So, think an API being leveraged in a way that I can utilize it across many different use cases. And within each use case, if my requirements change, if my data payload changes, if my schema in the data changes, if my protection law or my regulatory requirement for the protection of data changes, I don't have to go back to the overall service and make changes. And so if I have 1,000 consumers using this, you know, I've got 5,000 changes a week, but I want to put that on the owner, the caller of the service, to be able to describe in runtime, in real time, those changes. And so that's this self-service consumption. And again, the mantra here, so secure dynamic API. Okay, so we understand the principles. So how do we put this in design and practice? And so some of this we kind of talked about here. So we've got to have this kind of centralized management. So we talked about the automated onboarding, um, monitoring and auditing from a central capability. So being able to see and view and have a better risk and security posture in that respect. Policy management, being able to do this centrally integrated with our IAM, automated. Uh, and then on the consumption side, having the capability to consume that policy, but also being able to provide um, protect and unprotect, so where you need it, in a secure, isolated zone. And I'll come back to that because that's very important for the cross-border conversation. And that could manifest itself, as I said, in a physical, in terms of geopolitical, globe, region, country. It could manifest in terms of legal, regulatory, privacy, as well, right? So creating this secure isolation, this trust boundary, and being able to do your protect unprotect operations in there. So what does that look like overall and at a larger scale? So let's break this down. In our management pane, we are really looking to achieve policy as code, right? And this allows us to do that automated provisioning to go from uh, the point of friction we will introduce in terms of understanding the use case all the way to you're in dev now, right? um, and so that's really policy as code. That's utilizing some kind of central policy mechanism and an API against that to do it. And as part of that, there's also this sort of insight that we talked about. So utilizing our enterprise stack to obtain some of the governance aspects. So in terms of policy, being able to leverage something like Active Directory and all of the different governance that goes on top of that. For myself, that included things like semi-annual review periods and ownership, membership approvals and disapprovals, and being able to leverage a lot of that adds to the scalability. It adds to the low opex and the automation of a secure data service. And then on the security pane itself, so I've drawn a line here that's called security isolation from the management pane and the security pane. And why have I done that? So in the security pane, this is where we are going to do protect and unprotect operations. The goal is that the protect unprotect point has a particular root of trust, and we'll define the root of trust as living only in memory in the data security pane. But we'll go one step further to say that it is never accessible or known to the management pane. And on the consumption pane, you must come to the data security pane and be authorized for use for all protect and unprotect operations. And there's different ways we can achieve this. So we can also provide security isolation in a design tenant here is to provide security isolation not only from your management pane and your consumption pane, but also between the potentially geographies or lines of business or whatever the multi-tenant trust boundary might be. The trust boundary might even be on-prem cloud. Um, but so we need to isolate from our consumption and our management, as well as isolate from the different lobs and geographies. And this is really what comes down to the crux of cross-border. Okay, and so if you think about this being a particular country or a particular region, um, only the country and only the region have the material that it is necessary to do protect and unprotect. At the management pane, um, there is no capability. And the consumption pane, you must come back to the country or authority to be authorized for protect and unprotect. Um, and then when we look at the consumption pane, this is where it needs to be that very simple, self-describable. In this case, I'm choosing REST API in a way that as my consumers, my customers, as their requirements change from a data perspective, it could be data structure, it could be data security, it could be, any of those changes can be as much as possible self-describable to the customer itself, and allow for them to make those changes. Um, Okay, so just looking at this from a cross-border compliance, so we've set up our management pane perhaps in the U.S., and because we are able to disconnect our data security pane from our management pane, um, we can do that. We can also provide or replicate that management pane where we need it, and then we can set up um, our security pane. So, where do we need policy enforcement and protection? So that could be global. So, I mean, we could have an instance where there's no isolation, right? And so if I call this service in the U.S. or I call this service in Asia or I call this service in Europe, I get the same result, right? But we may need regional, and so we can create regional isolation points where now if I make a call into Europe, I'm actually getting something that is different than if I make a call into the US or if I make a call into Asia. I can then move the data in its protected form because it's now been protected as part of, let's say, the European region. Move it maybe into a fraud system or an analytics system, or perhaps move it into a SaaS or a third party, do some work and gain some insight, bring it back into the authorized area, and then authorize and unprotect. Perhaps maybe if it was a fraud, maybe there's an analyst sitting in this European region, and now they want to know perhaps who the fraud was, or the particular private details of the actual fraud, or maybe it's some kind of rewards tracking or something like that. And then we can also do this at a country level if we define geopolitical countries. So this is, cross-border in the geopolitical physical sense. Again, we could kind of change this to be sort of on-prem and SaaS, or third party, or untrust and trust. But it really is moving across these trust boundaries. Okay, so we talked about the principles for secure data service. We talked about how we apply that in design and architecture, and then how that's put to use in a cross-border setting. But I think there's other benefits to think about and to talk about when you've got this architecture, this service deployed. What does that mean, right? And so I think a couple of points, and I'll hit on a few, and I think I have another slide on this as well. But something to really keep in mind is this lean architecture, low opex, right? And that was one of the pain points we talked about in the beginning, which being able to scale to thousands of different software stacks and databases and their versions and regulatory requirement and privacy laws, the permutation of complexity is beyond control, right? And so this idea that you can support something like this with a very low opex is very advantageous. This idea of federated implementation. So we've got that central pane, we've got that central management layer, and we're distributing protection to authorized areas where we need protection, and we're isolating those authorized areas based on some kind of secure material authorized in that particular trusted area. And what that allows is a growth capability. So today you may have one region or two regions, or you may have a country, or you may have a third party, or you may have one use case where data is moving in this way. Um, and tomorrow you may have five more, or 15 more, or 20 more. And the idea to continue to expand and light up more trust boundaries is a very cookie cutter approach. It could be even put into something like CI/CD and made elastic as well, depending on your security requirements and form factor needs. Um, but that's a tremendous benefit to thinking about this kind of a service. I think also the demonstrated control. So now you've got all of this insight bubbling into your organization in terms of where data is being protected and unprotected, and by whom. Um, this opens up other areas. I think I touch on again is you demonstrate control to an auditor or a regulator when it comes to particular types of data, which is very important from an audit perspective. Obviously, again, going back to the low OPEX federated architecture, um, there's a very quick path to ROI, right? You can start small, you can start this small, you can expand it. And the rule I use actually is this clearly will not solve all of the issues facing a complex enterprise. But my goal when I uh, did this, and as I think about it, is always that I want to go after the 80%, and there exists in the enterprise a set of use cases, applications, business enablement that is generally otherwise blocked. Um, and that could use this kind of service to do something, right? To enable business, to reduce risk, to meet a regulation, and then there'll always be the 20%. Right? And the 20% is not excluded from this architecture. It's my recommendation. It's not your day one, but the 20% can be plugged in, right? You still keep the principal one, right? The automated onboard. Maybe you have to make a concession for that 20% because maybe it's an endpoint or something like that. You still keep the central policy. You still want to consume that same policy. And then on the consumption side, there's probably a concession there in terms of you may not use a REST API. In fact, the 20% is generally because there's no capability to do that. And so there, maybe you are at maybe you're in a JDBC or an actual native protection endpoint. But again, the idea of the three principles will still hold and it still remains for you. And I think I touched on some of this, but again, this is beyond just the cross border. This really allows you to empower your development community, empower your businesses, uh, very quickly de-risk a lot of different patterns from privacy and legal and regulatory when you're dealing with third parties and SaaS and movement across geopolitical borders. Um, Again, reducing risk postures and demonstrating control. Multi-tenant usage. So one of the ways that this can be utilized as well is in a chargeback, right? So you understand now who's using what from a consumption standpoint as well, and so this does lend itself to a chargeback capability as well, and the multi-tenant with security zones, cross-border, different legal entities, and things like that. Okay, so hopefully I was able to meet my initial goal that I set out, which is to help you understand how you can meet cross border and so much more using a secure data service. If you are interested in hearing more or learning more, again, please do feel free to reach out. My contact info is anthony.camerano@protegrity.com. And LinkedIn is AntCam56. And thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Anthony, for that presentation. Anthony is not able to join us right now for a Q&A, so we pulled in Paneet. Paneet, I've got a couple questions for you to expand on Anthony's presentation.
Sure.
Are there security solutions to manage our data privacy programs?
Yes, there are different security solutions which helps with the data privacy program. It depends on the customer use cases and the requirements, but there are the protegrity has the capability to do the discovery within the organization, as well as there are other DLP solutions or the CASB solutions which can be used for doing the discovery in the organization and map to the different privacy controls or the privacy regulations which are out there.
Okay, great. And then to expand on that, what are your recommendations for small organizations?
So for the small organizations, I would recommend to do a data protection assessment at least once in a year, and that will basically give them the clear picture what are the gaps present with respect to the data protection in their current environment, and then they can define the roadmap and kind of like a move from the take that current state assessment as a building block, and then define their future state and kind of build on that kind of.
Okay, great. Do we have a way to monitor and detect security incidents continuously?
Yes, there are various solutions out there, basically, which can be used to detect the incidents of the security. Again, we have to look security in like in defense. defense in detail here kind of thing, because there would be when we think of the security, there are different layers are there of the security. So if you think of security, it's more like a, how I see is that it has to be like an onion based approach, where you have application security, you have data security, you have uh, identity and access management and everything. So we have to look at the kind of an onion based approach and basically apply the controls at each and every layer. I hope I answered the question what was there.
Yeah, I think so. Anything you want to add just based on that presentation, Paneet, or anything that that's caught your attention this morning?
Sure. So uh, in case basically if you need much more detailed answer, basically if and what Anthony presented or what I answered, and you need much more details, so feel free to contact me as well on the LinkedIn, or you can reach out to me at Puneet at encryptionconsulting.com as well. So I would be more than happy to answer the things. And but what Anthony presented are the real world problems which most of the financial institutions are facing as of right now. And protegrity is one of the best solutions out there which can help financial institutions meet all those cross-border regulations and everything.
Thank you, Paneet. And I know we also have a Slack channel that we've created, so we'll invite you to join that Slack channel as well. Thanks, Paneet, for joining us. We've got about 10 minutes here until our next presentation. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at 10:25 Central Time.